Have you ever noticed the moment you try to defend yourself, you start losing? Voices get louder, emotions take over, and somehow, even when you're right, you walk away feeling smaller, drained, and unheard, as if the truth itself got buried under noise. But what if the real game was never about arguing in the first place? What if the people who truly hold power don't waste energy trying to win every confrontation, don't rush to prove themselves, don't react to every challenge thrown at them? Instead, they observe quietly, they wait with intention, and they understand far more than they reveal. And when they finally choose to act, it's precise, calculated, and already too late for anyone else to catch up. Today, we step into a world where strategy is silent and power is subtle, where strength is not shown through loud dominance but through controlled presence. And one man reveals how anyone can navigate the chaos of modern life, outsmart the noise, and rise above conflict without losing what matters most, their integrity. Most people don't realize the exact moment they lose control of a situation. It doesn't happen when someone defeats them in an argument, and it doesn't happen when they run out of words. It happens much earlier, at the precise moment they feel the urge to respond immediately. That impulse, that need to speak, to defend, to explain, is where power quietly slips away. Because in that moment, emotions take the lead, and awareness takes a step back. The world we live in constantly rewards noise. Fast replies, instant reactions, quick opinions, these are seen as confidence. But more often than not, they are just unfiltered emotion disguised as strength. Amir understood something most people overlook. Silence is not the absence of power, it is the containment of it. When he first entered the office, he noticed how conversations worked. People weren't really listening to each other. They were waiting for their turn to speak. Meetings were filled with interruptions, subtle competitions, and the constant need to appear competent. Everyone wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. And in that environment, silence stood out, not as weakness, but as something unfamiliar. Amir didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to add his opinion. He allowed others to finish, even when they were wrong, not because he lacked knowledge, but because he valued timing over impulse. Over time, something interesting began to happen. People started talking more freely around him. They revealed frustrations, insecurities, even strategies they wouldn't normally share. They felt comfortable because silence doesn't threaten, it invites. There's a psychological weight to words that most people underestimate. Once you speak, you are committed. Your position is exposed. Your thoughts are no longer flexible. But when you remain silent, you retain control. You observe patterns. You notice contradictions. You understand not just what people are saying, but why they are saying it. Amir would often sit in meetings where debates turned heated. Voices would rise, arguments would loop in circles, and in the middle of all that chaos, he would remain still. Not disengaged, but deeply present. He watched how certain individuals reacted when challenged. Some became defensive. Some became aggressive. Others tried to dominate the conversation. Every reaction was information. Every word revealed something deeper than the surface discussion. One afternoon, a colleague confronted him directly. "Why don't you ever say anything? Don't you have opinions?" The question carried a hint of judgment, as if silence equaled ignorance. Amir simply looked at him and replied, "I do. I just don't need to prove them immediately." That response lingered longer than any long explanation could have, because it subtly shifted the dynamic. It suggested that speaking is a choice, not a reflex, and that control over that choice is where strength lies. In a world where everyone feels the need to react instantly, the one who chooses when to respond gains an invisible advantage. Silence also has another dimension. It disrupts expectations. People are used to predictable patterns. If they criticize you, they expect defense. If they provoke you, they expect reaction. When that reaction doesn't come, it creates uncertainty, and uncertainty shifts power. Amir experienced this when one of the senior managers indirectly questioned his competence in a meeting. It was a subtle remark, but clearly intended to undermine him. Everyone in the room waited. They expected Amir to respond, to defend himself, to clarify his position. But he didn't. He simply acknowledged the comment with a calm nod and let the conversation continue. The moment passed, but the impact didn't. because his silence communicated something deeper than words ever could. It showed confidence. It showed that he didn't feel threatened enough to react. And more importantly, it forced others to question the intention behind the criticism rather than his capability. Over time, people began to interpret his silence differently. What was once seen as passiveness became perceived as control. What was once mistaken for lack of input became recognized as deliberate restraint. This shift didn't happen because Amir tried to change their perception directly. It happened because consistency builds credibility. When silence is used intentionally, not out of fear but out of awareness, it carries weight. It becomes a signal that when this person does speak, it will matter. And that's exactly what happened. When Amir eventually shared his thoughts, people listened, not because he demanded attention, but because he had earned it through discipline. There's also a deeper internal aspect to silence that often goes unnoticed. It creates space. Space to think clearly, to process information without distortion, to respond rather than react. Most conflicts escalate not because of the issue itself, but because of how quickly people respond without understanding. Amir trained himself to pause, even if just for a few seconds. That pause allowed him to separate emotion from logic. It allowed him to see the bigger picture instead of getting trapped in the moment. And in high-pressure environments, that ability becomes rare and valuable. Because while others are driven by urgency, the one who moves with clarity naturally stands out. Silence is not about avoiding communication. It's about refining it. It's about understanding that not every thought needs to be expressed, and not every situation requires immediate input. There is strength in choosing what to say, when to say it, and sometimes choosing not to say anything at all. Amir didn't avoid speaking because he lacked confidence. He avoided unnecessary speaking because he understood the cost of it. Every word shapes perception. Every reaction reveals position. And when those are given away too freely, control diminishes. In personal interactions, this principle extends even further. When someone is emotional, upset, or trying to provoke a reaction, silence can act as a stabilizer. It prevents escalation. It creates a boundary without confrontation. Amir applied this not just in professional settings but in everyday life. When faced with criticism, he listened fully before responding. When someone tried to draw him into unnecessary arguments, he chose calm over engagement. Not out of avoidance, but out of awareness that not every situation deserves energy, and that selective engagement is a form of power. What made Amir's approach effective wasn't just silence itself, but the intention behind it. It wasn't used to manipulate or to create distance. It was used to understand, to observe, and to respond with precision when it actually mattered. That distinction is crucial, because silence without awareness can be misunderstood, but silence with purpose becomes a tool, a way to navigate complexity without losing control, a way to stay grounded while others lose balance. As time passed, the same people who once overlooked him began to rely on his perspective. Not because he spoke often, but because when he did, it carried clarity. And that clarity came from everything he had absorbed in silence. Every overlooked detail, every subtle behavior, every unspoken tension. He had seen it all, simply because he wasn't distracted by the need to constantly express himself. In a world driven by noise, he mastered stillness. And in that stillness, he found something most people spend their lives chasing without realizing it: control over himself, and by extension, influence over situations without ever needing to dominate them. People like to believe that effort alone defines success, that if you work hard enough and prove your value clearly, recognition will naturally follow. But reality doesn't always operate on effort alone. It operates on perception. The way people see you often matters just as much as what you actually do, sometimes even more. This is the part most people struggle to accept, because it feels uncomfortable to admit that human judgment is influenced by assumptions, impressions, and subtle signals rather than pure truth. Amir understood this early, not through books or theories, but by quietly observing how people treated each other. He noticed that the most capable person in the room wasn't always the most respected. The loudest voice often received attention, even when it lacked depth. Meanwhile, those who constantly tried to prove their intelligence sometimes ended up being seen as insecure or even threatening. It wasn't logical, but it was consistent. People responded to how they felt around someone, not just what that person delivered. Instead of fighting this reality, Amir adapted to it. He didn't try to force others to see him as highly capable. He didn't jump into conversations to display knowledge or correct every mistake. He allowed a different image to form, one that felt harmless, calm, and unthreatening. To most people, he seemed reserved, maybe even slightly underestimated. Some assumed he lacked ambition. Others believed he simply preferred to stay in the background. None of these assumptions were entirely accurate, but Amir didn't rush to correct them. This wasn't about deception or pretending to be someone else. It was about understanding that not every truth needs to be revealed immediately. There is a difference between lying and choosing what to show, and Amir stayed firmly within ethical boundaries. He never misled anyone with false information. He simply didn't feel the need to constantly broadcast his abilities. In a team discussion one day, a complex problem was being debated. Several people were offering solutions, each trying to outdo the other. Amir had already figured out a workable approach, but he remained silent. Instead, he listened as others spoke, watching how their ideas were received, noticing which personalities dominated the conversation and which ones hesitated. Eventually, one of his colleagues proposed a partial solution that had potential but lacked refinement. That's when Amir spoke, not to take over but to build on it. "That could work," he said calmly, "if we adjust the timeline and redistribute the workload slightly." The room shifted. Instead of seeing him as someone competing for attention, they saw him as someone contributing constructively. His suggestion was accepted quickly, not because it was dramatically better, but because it came without ego. He didn't try to overshadow anyone, and that made people more open to his input. This is how perception works in subtle ways. When people don't feel threatened, they lower their guard. They become more receptive, more cooperative, and more willing to listen. But when someone appears overly eager to prove themselves, it can trigger resistance, even if their intentions are good. It creates an invisible barrier where others feel the need to defend their own position. Amir avoided creating that barrier. He let his actions speak over time instead of forcing immediate recognition. He completed his work with consistency, helped others without making it obvious, and maintained a steady presence. Gradually, people began to associate him with reliability and clarity. They didn't remember specific moments where he tried to impress them, but they remembered how he made situations easier, calmer, and more manageable. One evening, Daniel asked him directly, "Don't you feel like people are underestimating you?" Amir looked at him for a moment before answering, "Underestimation is only dangerous if you believe it yourself." Daniel frowned slightly, trying to process that. Amir continued, "If they think I'm less capable, they expect less from me. That gives me space to operate without pressure, and when I do deliver, it has more impact." This perspective changed the way Daniel saw his own behavior. He realized that he often tried too hard to correct people's assumptions about him. If someone doubted him, he would immediately try to prove them wrong, sometimes over-explaining or pushing his ideas aggressively. In doing so, he unintentionally created tension. People didn't always resist his ideas because they were wrong, but because of how they were presented. Perception is shaped not just by what you say, but how you say it when you say it, and even what you choose not to say. It's built through small, consistent signals rather than one grand display. Amir's calm demeanor, his measured responses, and his lack of urgency to impress all contributed to an image that felt grounded and trustworthy. There is also an important ethical dimension to this. Managing perception should never cross into manipulation or dishonesty. Amir never fabricated achievements or took credit for others' work. He didn't distort reality to gain advantage. Instead, He focused on authenticity while being mindful of how his behavior influenced others' impressions. This balance is critical, especially when viewed through a moral framework that values honesty, fairness, and accountability. In many ways, this aligns with broader principles of character. Intention matters, actions matter, but presentation also matters because it affects how those actions are received and understood. If your message is lost because of poor delivery or unnecessary aggression, the outcome suffers even if your intention was good. Over time, Amir's reputation grew quietly. People began to seek his input, not because he demanded attention, but because they trusted his judgment. He didn't need to announce his competence. It became evident through repeated experience. This is a slower path compared to aggressively promoting oneself, but it is far more stable. There was a moment during a high-pressure project when everything started to fall apart. Deadlines were missed, communication broke down, and frustration spread across the team. Naturally, attention turned toward those who usually dominated discussions, expecting them to provide solutions. But this time, their usual confidence didn't translate into clarity. The situation required calm thinking, not loud opinions. That's when someone said, almost instinctively, "Let's ask Amir." It was a simple suggestion, but it reflected a deeper shift. The same person who was once overlooked had become a point of reference, not because he changed who he was dramatically, but because his consistent behavior reshaped how others saw him. This is the long-term effect of managing perception with integrity. It doesn't rely on tricks or shortcuts. It builds gradually, through alignment between what you do and how you present it. It recognizes that human perception is not always perfectly rational, but instead of rejecting that reality, it works within it ethically. Daniel later reflected on this and realized that perception is not about controlling what others think in a manipulative sense. It's about understanding that people interpret signals and being intentional about the signals you send. If you are careless with those signals, misunderstandings happen. If you are mindful, clarity improves. Amir never tried to control every opinion about him, because that's impossible. But he made sure that his behavior consistently reflected patience, reliability, and composure. Over time, those qualities became the lens through which people viewed him. The key insight here is subtle but powerful. You don't need to force people to see your value. You need to live it in a way that becomes difficult to ignore. At the same time, you don't need to correct every false assumption immediately. Some assumptions dissolve on their own when reality quietly contradicts them. This requires patience because the results are not instant. It also requires confidence because you must be comfortable letting others underestimate you temporarily. But when done correctly, it creates a unique advantage. You move without unnecessary resistance, build trust without demanding it, and allow your work to speak in a way that feels natural rather than forced. In the end, perception is not separate from reality. It is part of it. The way people see you influences opportunities, relationships, and outcomes. Ignoring that fact puts you at a disadvantage. Understanding it, while staying grounded in ethical principles, allows you to navigate situations with greater awareness and effectiveness. Conflict has a strange way of pulling people in. The moment tension appears, most feel an instinctive urge to step forward, take a position, defend a side, or prove a point. It feels necessary, almost like staying neutral means being weak or uninvolved. But what many fail to realize is that conflict, when left to unfold naturally, reveals far more than any direct questioning ever could. Amir understood this deeply. He didn't see conflict as something to immediately control or suppress. He saw it as a moment where people unintentionally exposed their true priorities, their emotional triggers, and even their hidden insecurities. While others rushed to speak, he stepped back, not out of fear but out of awareness. In one particular situation at work, tension had been building for weeks. Two senior managers, Harris and Lyle, had opposing approaches to a project. At first, the disagreement was subtle, buried under polite language and professional tone. But as deadlines approached and pressure increased, that politeness began to crack. Meetings became sharper, conversations more direct, and small disagreements started turning into visible frustration. The team felt the shift immediately. People began aligning themselves quietly, choosing sides based on personal comfort rather than logic. Some supported Harris because of his authority, others leaned toward Lyle because of his assertiveness. The atmosphere became heavy, and every discussion felt like it could turn into an argument at any moment. Daniel found himself caught in the middle. He approached Amir one afternoon and said, "This is getting out of control. We need to step in before it affects everyone." Amir listened, then asked calmly, "Step in and do what?" "Help resolve it," Daniel replied. "At least take a side so we're not left behind." Amir shook his head slightly. "If you choose a side too early, you inherit their problems without understanding them." Daniel didn't fully understand at the time, but Amir was seeing something beyond the surface. He knew that conflict, especially between strong personalities, tends to escalate in predictable ways. At first, people argue about ideas. Then they begin to defend their positions. Eventually, it becomes less about the issue and more about ego. That's when mistakes happen, because people stop thinking clearly and start reacting emotionally. Instead of interrupting this process, Amir allowed it to unfold. During meetings, he remained present but quiet. He observed how Harris reacted when challenged, how Lyle pushed back when questioned, and how both of them started repeating their points with increasing intensity. He noticed the small inconsistencies in their arguments, the moments where frustration caused them to contradict earlier statements, and the subtle shift from problem-solving to self-defense. These details were important, not because Amir wanted to use them against anyone, but because they revealed the real source of the conflict. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about control, recognition, and fear of losing influence. Most people in the room missed this entirely because they were too busy reacting. They either agreed loudly, disagreed emotionally, or stayed silent out of confusion. But Amir's silence was different. It was active, focused, and intentional. As the conflict intensified over the following days, something inevitable happened. Both Harris and Lyle began to make mistakes. Harris, trying to maintain authority, dismissed feedback too quickly, which frustrated the team. Lyle, in his effort to prove his point, overcommitted to unrealistic timelines. Each action created new problems, and those problems started becoming visible to everyone. This is the nature of conflict when driven by ego. It exposes weaknesses that would otherwise remain hidden. Daniel began to notice it too. One evening he said to Amir, "They're both messing up. It's obvious now." Amir nodded. It was always there. It just needed time to show itself. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked. Amir replied, "Now we understand." Understanding is often more valuable than immediate action. When you rush into conflict without clarity, you risk becoming part of the problem. But when you observe first, you gain a perspective that allows you to respond effectively when the right moment arrives. Eventually, the situation reached a breaking point. A major issue surfaced in the project, one that neither Harris nor Lyle could resolve alone. The tension in the room was no longer just uncomfortable, it was unsustainable. The team needed direction, not more arguments. This was the moment where Amir chose to step in. He didn't take sides. He didn't criticize either manager directly. Instead, he addressed the situation itself. "We're trying to solve this from two different directions," he said calmly. "But the problem isn't choosing one approach over the other. It's aligning both into a single plan." His tone was neutral, his words precise. Because he hadn't been involved in the earlier arguments, his perspective felt unbiased. People listened, not defensively but openly. Even Harris and Lyle, exhausted from their conflict, were more willing to consider an alternative. Amir then outlined a solution that incorporated the strengths of both approaches while avoiding their weaknesses. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was balanced. And because it came after a period of observation rather than reaction, it addressed the root of the problem rather than just the surface disagreement. The room shifted. The tension didn't disappear instantly, but it softened. For the first time in days, the focus returned to the project instead of personal conflict. After the meeting, Daniel approached him again. "You could have said that earlier and stopped all of this." Amir looked at him and said, "If I said it earlier, they wouldn't have heard it." Timing matters as much as content. When people are in the middle of defending themselves, they are not receptive to solutions. They are focused on protecting their position. But once the conflict exposes its own flaws, once the limitations of each side become clear, that's when people are ready to listen. This approach doesn't mean avoiding responsibility or ignoring problems. It means recognizing that not every situation requires immediate intervention. Some situations require patience, because the process itself reveals information that cannot be obtained any other way. There is also an important ethical boundary here. Observing conflict should never turn into exploiting it for personal gain or encouraging harm. Amir never fueled the tension, never spread information, and never manipulated outcomes behind the scenes. He simply allowed the situation to develop naturally while maintaining his integrity. In many ways, this reflects a broader principle of restraint. Just because you can act doesn't mean you should act immediately. Just because you have an opinion doesn't mean it must be expressed at once. Wisdom often lies in knowing when to wait. Conflict, when approached with this mindset, becomes less threatening and more informative. It reveals how people think under pressure, how they prioritize, and how they respond when their ideas are challenged. These insights are valuable not just for resolving the current issue, but for understanding future dynamics as well. Daniel eventually adopted this perspective in his own interactions. Instead of reacting to every disagreement, he began to pause, observe, and ask himself whether his involvement would actually improve the situation or simply add to the noise. Over time, he found that he was making better decisions, not because he was more knowledgeable, but because he was more aware. Amir's approach didn't eliminate conflict, because conflict is a natural part of any environment where different ideas and personalities exist. But it changed how conflict was handled. Instead of being something to fear or rush into, it became something to understand and navigate thoughtfully. This shift in perspective creates a significant advantage. While others are caught in the immediate emotions of the moment, reacting impulsively and often creating additional complications, the one who observes gains clarity. And with clarity comes the ability to act effectively when it truly matters. In the end, the goal is not to avoid conflict entirely or to dominate it aggressively. The goal is to learn from it, to recognize its patterns, and to use that understanding to bring about resolution in a way that is balanced, fair, and constructive. Power can be learned, strategies can be practiced, and influence can be developed, but without character, all of it becomes unstable. It may work for a while, it may even bring quick success, but it carries within it the seeds of its own collapse. Amir understood this in a way that went beyond theory. For him, character was not something separate from strategy. It was the foundation that made every decision meaningful and sustainable. In environments where competition is intense, it becomes easy to justify small compromises. A slight exaggeration here, a hidden truth there, a moment of taking credit that wasn't fully earned. Each step seems minor, almost harmless in isolation. Many people convince themselves that this is simply how the world works, that if they don't play along, they will be left behind. Over time, these small compromises accumulate, shaping a pattern of behavior that slowly erodes trust. Amir refused to take that path, not because it was easy, but because he understood the long-term cost. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Reputation, once damaged, spreads faster than it can be repaired. He saw others gain temporary advantages through questionable choices, but he also noticed how those same choices created silent doubt around them. People began to question their intentions, their words, and eventually their reliability. One afternoon, during a project review, a mistake surfaced. It was not a critical error, but it had caused delays and confusion within the team. No one immediately took responsibility. The room became quiet, not in a calm way, but in a tense, uncertain way where everyone was waiting to see who would speak first. It would have been easy for Amir to stay silent, to let the issue pass, or to allow someone else to take the blame indirectly. Instead, he spoke with clarity. "I missed that detail," he said. "I should have double-checked the data before finalizing it." The response was immediate, not in words but in atmosphere. The tension softened. The need for blame disappeared. By taking responsibility without defensiveness, Amir shifted the focus from fault to solution. Others followed, acknowledging their own contributions to the issue. What could have turned into a cycle of blame became a moment of collective accountability. This is where character reveals its true strength. It is not just about avoiding wrongdoing, but about actively choosing honesty, even when it is uncomfortable. It is about standing firm in principles when there is pressure to bend them. This kind of consistency builds a form of trust that cannot be manufactured through clever tactics. Daniel once asked him, "Don't you think being this straightforward puts you at a disadvantage? What if someone uses your honesty against you?" Amir considered the question before answering. If honesty becomes a weakness, the problem is not honesty, it's the environment. And even then, I would rather deal with the consequences of truth than carry the weight of deception. This perspective reflects a deeper understanding of accountability. Every action has consequences, both visible and hidden. While unethical behavior may produce quick results, it also creates internal conflict and external suspicion. Over time, this combination weakens both the individual and the system they operate within. In contrast, integrity creates alignment. Your actions match your values, your words match your intentions, and your decisions reflect a consistent standard. This alignment simplifies decision-making because you are not constantly calculating how to maintain a false image or protect a hidden truth. Instead, you operate from a place of clarity. There were moments when Amir's approach seemed slower. Others moved ahead quickly, gaining recognition through aggressive self-promotion or strategic alliances that were not entirely genuine. For a while, it appeared as if they were winning. But as time passed, cracks began to show. Promises that were made couldn't be kept. Trust that was assumed started to fade. Relationships built on convenience began to weaken under pressure. Amir's progress, on the other hand, was steady. It did not rely on shortcuts or manipulation. It was built on consistency, reliability, and a reputation that people could depend on. When challenges arose, others turned to him not just because of his skills, but because of his character. They knew he would not shift blame, distort facts, or act in self-interest at the expense of fairness. This kind of trust is powerful because it extends beyond individual interactions. It influences how opportunities are offered, how responsibilities are assigned, and how leadership is perceived. People are more willing to support and follow someone whose actions are grounded in integrity because it creates a sense of security. They know that decisions will be made with consideration, not just calculation. There is also a moral dimension that cannot be ignored. From an ethical perspective, actions are not judged solely by outcomes, but by intentions and methods. Achieving success through harm, deception, or injustice contradicts fundamental principles that emphasize fairness, honesty, and accountability. Amir remained mindful of this, ensuring that his pursuit of progress never crossed those boundaries. One situation tested this commitment directly. A colleague approached him privately with an offer to share inside information that could give him an advantage in an upcoming evaluation. It was presented as a harmless shortcut, something that would not hurt anyone directly but could significantly improve his chances. For a moment, the temptation was real. The opportunity to secure success with less effort to gain certainty in an uncertain process was appealing. But Amir also understood the hidden cost. Accepting such an offer would compromise his integrity, even if no one else ever found out. It would create a dependency on unfair advantage, and more importantly, it would change how he saw himself. He declined without hesitation, not with judgment or criticism, but with clarity. "I'd rather earn it the right way," he said. The colleague shrugged it off, but the decision had a deeper impact than it appeared. It reinforced Amir's internal standard, making it stronger and more resilient. Each time he chose integrity over convenience, that standard became easier to maintain. Character is not built in one moment. It is built through repeated choices, especially in situations where the easier option conflicts with the right one. These choices may go unnoticed by others, but they shape who you become and how you operate in every situation. Over time, Amir's approach influenced those around him, not through direct instruction, but through example. People began to reflect on their own behavior, questioning whether their actions aligned with their values. Small shifts occurred within the team, not because of rules or enforcement, but because integrity proved to be more effective than manipulation. Daniel noticed this change as well. "Things feel different now," he said one day. "Less tension, less competition in a negative way." Amir nodded. When people trust each other, they focus more on the work than on protecting themselves. This is the broader impact of character. It doesn't just benefit the individual, it improves the environment as a whole. It reduces unnecessary conflict, strengthens collaboration, and creates a culture where people can operate with confidence rather than suspicion. The idea that strategy and ethics must be separate is a false assumption. In reality, the most effective strategies are those that are aligned with strong principles. They are sustainable, adaptable, and resilient under pressure. They do not rely on secrecy or manipulation to function, which makes them more stable over time. Amir's journey reflected this balance. He understood the dynamics of power, perception, and conflict, but he filtered all of it through a consistent moral framework. This ensured that his actions not only achieved results, but also maintained respect and trust. In the end, character is what determines whether power becomes constructive or destructive. It shapes how influence is used, how decisions are made, and how success is defined. Without it, even the most sophisticated strategies lose their value because they lack the foundation needed to endure. Most people believe power is something external: a position, a title, influence over others, the ability to control outcomes or direct decisions. It looks visible, measurable, almost tangible. But what Amir understood was something far less obvious and far more difficult to achieve. Real power is internal. It is the ability to control yourself when every instinct is pushing you to react. This kind of control is not natural. It goes against impulse. When someone disrespects you, the immediate reaction is to respond. When you are challenged, the instinct is to defend. When you are given authority, the temptation is to assert it. These reactions feel justified in the moment, but they often create consequences that extend far beyond that moment. Amir had learned to pause between impulse and action. That pause, though small, was where his strength lived. It allowed him to choose his response instead of being driven by emotion. While others moved quickly, reacting to situations as they unfolded, he moved deliberately, guided by awareness rather than urgency. There was a day when this difference became clear to everyone around him. A senior colleague openly criticized his approach during a meeting. The tone was sharp, the words direct, and the intention seemed less about improvement and more about dominance. The room became still, waiting for Amir to respond. Moments like this often turn into power struggles, where both sides try to assert control through argument. Amir didn't react immediately. He listened, not just to the words but to the tone behind them. He noticed the frustration, the need to assert authority, the underlying tension that had little to do with the actual issue being discussed. Instead of responding to the surface, he chose to address the situation with calm clarity. "That's a fair concern," he said, his voice steady. "Let's look at the data again and make sure we're aligned." There was no defensiveness, no attempt to push back aggressively. The response shifted the focus away from personal confrontation and back to the work itself. The tension eased, not because the criticism disappeared, but because it lost its emotional charge. By controlling his reaction, Amir prevented the situation from escalating. This is where self-control becomes visible as power. It doesn't dominate the room, but it stabilizes it. It creates space for reason to replace emotion. It turns potential conflict into constructive dialogue. After the meeting, Daniel approached him, still processing what had happened. "I don't understand how you stayed so calm," he said. "I would have reacted immediately." Amir replied, "Reacting would have made it about me. Staying calm kept it about the issue." That distinction is critical. When reactions are driven by ego, the situation shifts from problem-solving to personal defense. Once that shift happens, clarity is lost. Decisions become influenced by emotion rather than logic, and outcomes suffer as a result. Self-control is not about suppressing emotion entirely. It is about recognizing it without letting it dictate your behavior. Amir still felt the same initial reactions as anyone else. He noticed the discomfort, the urge to respond, the instinct to protect his position. But he did not act on those feelings immediately. He allowed them to settle, to pass through without taking control. This ability requires practice. It is developed over time through conscious effort. Each situation becomes an opportunity to strengthen that internal discipline. The more you exercise it, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, what once required effort begins to feel like a default state. There is also a deeper layer to this control, one that extends beyond external interactions. It involves managing internal desires, expectations, and attachments. When people become too attached to outcomes, they lose balance. Success inflates their confidence, failure shakes their stability. Their sense of self becomes tied to results that are often influenced by factors beyond their control. Amir avoided this by focusing on process rather than outcome. He gave his full attention to what he could control, his actions, his decisions, his effort, while accepting that results would follow naturally. This mindset reduced unnecessary pressure and allowed him to remain consistent regardless of circumstances. During a critical phase in the project, when outcomes were uncertain and pressure was high, many around him became anxious. They overworked, overthought, and second-guessed their decisions. The more they tried to control the outcome, the more unstable they became. Amir, on the other hand, maintained his routine. He worked with focus, made decisions based on available information, and avoided unnecessary speculation. Daniel noticed this difference and asked, "Don't you worry about what will happen if things don't work out?" Amir responded, "Worry doesn't change the outcome. It only affects how I handle the process." This approach reflects a deeper understanding of control. There are things you can influence and things you cannot. Confusing the two leads to frustration. Recognizing the difference leads to clarity. Self-control also shapes how power is used when it is finally given. When Amir was placed in a leadership position, he had the authority to make decisions, to direct others, and to influence the direction of the team. This is where many people lose balance. The shift from having no control to having significant control can trigger a change in behavior. Ego expands, patience decreases, and decisions become more self-centered. Amir remained consistent. He did not use his position to assert dominance or demand obedience. Instead, He focused on creating alignment within the team. He listened more than he spoke, encouraged input, and made decisions with consideration for both immediate needs and long-term impact. One of his first actions as a leader was to address the existing tension within the team. Instead of imposing strict rules or forcing quick changes, he created an environment where people could express concerns openly. He acknowledged past issues without assigning blame and emphasized the importance of moving forward collectively. This approach required restraint. It would have been easier to enforce authority, to demand compliance, and to establish control quickly. But that kind of control is fragile. It depends on position rather than respect. Amir chose a slower, more stable path. Self-control also prevented him from overusing his authority. He did not intervene in every minor issue or decision. He trusted others to handle their responsibilities, stepping in only when necessary. This balance allowed the team to grow while maintaining overall direction. Daniel observed this and said, "You could control everything now, but you don't." Amir replied, "Control is not about doing everything. It's about knowing what not to do." This reflects the essence of internal power. It is not measured by how much you control externally, but by how well you manage yourself. It is visible in restraint, in patience, in the ability to stay grounded regardless of circumstances. There were still moments that tested this discipline. Situations where frustration built up, where outcomes didn't match effort, where decisions were questioned. In those moments, the temptation to react strongly, to assert authority more aggressively, was present. But each time, Amir returned to the same principle. Control yourself first, then address the situation. Over time, this consistency created a stable environment. People felt secure in their roles, confident in their contributions, and respectful of the leadership guiding them. The absence of unnecessary reactions reduced tension, improved communication, and allowed the team to focus on meaningful progress. Self-control, in this sense, becomes the foundation of everything else. It influences how you handle conflict, how you build relationships, how you respond to success and failure, and how you use whatever power you are given. Without it, even the best strategies can collapse under pressure. With it, even difficult situations become manageable. The idea that strength is shown through dominance is common, but incomplete. True strength is shown through restraint. It is the ability to remain composed when others are not, to think clearly when emotions rise, and to act with intention rather than impulse. This kind of power is not loud or visible in obvious ways. It does not seek attention or recognition, but it is felt in every interaction, in every decision, in every outcome that reflects clarity instead of chaos. Disclaimer: this story is inspired by strategic thinking often associated with historical philosophies, but it is not an encouragement to manipulate, deceive, or harm others. All lessons presented here are intended to promote self-awareness, emotional intelligence, patience, and ethical decision-making.